What is your opinion on President Putin's peace proposal for Ukraine from last weekend?
Two things. One is what President Putin said. He laid out a clear Russian position on how the fighting could stop immediately. The second thing that's remarkable is how obtuse the US and European reaction was to President Putin. It was immediately tarred as an ultimatum, as a disgrace, as a non-negotiation, whereas President Putin absolutely put forward a negotiating position that should be met at the negotiating table by a Ukrainian, US, or NATO negotiating position. But the idea is sit down and talk. Don't just shoot each other. And President Putin very clearly said, let's talk. Now, the basis that he proposed is also rather straightforward, though there are points that are negotiable. Some, I think, are probably not negotiable. The non-negotiable point that I think is not only correct from Russia's point of view, but correct from America's point of view, is that Ukraine should be a neutral country without U.S. military forces through NATO being right up against Russia's border. Russia doesn't want that, and the United States should not want that, should not want that. Do we really want to have more direct war with Russia? Of course we shouldn't. This has been the bone of contention for 30 years. The U.S. once upon a time promised in 1990 NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. Then the U.S. cheated, starting with Bill Clinton, and then carrying on since then with all of the American presidents. It's a cheat. Russia kept saying, stop the NATO enlargement. We don't want you on our doorstep, any more than the United States would like Russia or China to have military bases on the Rio Grande in Mexico, or like the United States did not accept Russia or Soviet Union putting nuclear weapons into Cuba in 1962. Russia doesn't want it. So that's the first point. And I think it's non-negotiable from the Russian point of view, but I once told the White House, it's not even a concession. It's a good thing for the United States. Understand reality. So that's the first. The second thing that Russia said is Crimea is ours. And it is going to be. I think that is absolutely non-negotiable. Crimea has been the base for Russia's naval fleet in the Black Sea since 1783. As Americans, our country wasn't even with the Constitution yet by then, and Russia already had its naval fleet in Sevastopol in 1783. Now, historically, starting with the British Empire, the idea was get Russia out of the Black Sea by overtaking Crimea or surrounding Russia in the Black Sea through British or now US/NATO military power. Russia's not having it. What's notable, Judge, is that up until 2014, this wasn't an issue. Of course, Russia had said, don't expand NATO, but Crimea wasn't a particular point of challenge. It became a particular point of challenge when the U.S. helped to overthrow a government in Ukraine, and President Putin immediately said, we're not going to hand over, because you've overthrown a government, our naval base to NATO. And that's when a referendum was held in Crimea, which is ethnically Russian. They voted overwhelmingly, we stay with Russia, and it's been part of Russia. The third part of what President Putin said was that Russia demands its sovereignty over 4 annexed regions that it has annexed as of 2022. These are the Donbas regions of Donetsk and Lugansk, and also southern Ukrainian regions of Zaporozhye and Kherson. There's a history to this, a long history. The long history is that Russia was not demanding that territory until the United States pushed the NATO enlargement, refused the negotiations until the end of 2021. And then Russia said, okay, they want to be part of Russia. We take them as part of Russia. I think that the specifics on that are negotiable. Russia does not control all four of those regions. It controls parts of them. That's where the contact line of the battlefield is. This is a point to negotiate. The West, I don't know, the West, what do I mean by the West? I mean the United States government and the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and the President of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, gave a completely absurd and absolutely wrong and harmful response to this. Oh, those are just demands, unacceptable, we fight on. Instead of saying, well, that's Russia's position, we have other positions, but we should now sit down to negotiate because clearly there is a way to reach peace. There is a way to reach peace at the negotiating table. It's the US that keeps rejecting the idea of negotiations. And I've never seen anything quite like the Biden administration as being the worst of this, because other presidents have understood that you negotiate. It's not a matter of left or right, weak or soft or strong. You know, we had President Reagan absolutely negotiating with the Soviet Union. And he famously said that the way to negotiate is trust but verify. In other words, I'm not going to be a sap in this, but I'm ready to negotiate. President Kennedy negotiated, and on. Strong presidents negotiate, weak presidents don't, and this is our problem right now.
What are your thoughts on President Putin's peace offer, which includes the immediate withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from specific regions and Ukraine abandoning plans to join NATO?
US and EU and NATO leaders all focused on that means the entirety of these four regions, that point, rather than on what you're pointing to, which is that we will stop fighting when these basics are met. We don't have to meet every basic that President Putin said. I can tell you, I know what the core of this is because it's been 30 years of discussion. And I'll explain another bit of evidence of why it's the core. The core of this from the start has been NATO enlargement.
Right.
Russia does not want the US on its doorstep. We don't want Russia on our doorstep. If our leaders had any honesty at all, they would tell this to the American people and say this to Russia. Just a little bit of honesty, just once, to explain that we cheated on promises. We have driven up recklessly on a project to surround Russia with NATO, and it wasn't a good idea. That's it, then the war stops. That's the essence of this. You know, Russia never had territorial demands on Ukraine up until the coup that overthrew Yanukovych in 2014. As I said, they didn't make territorial demands on the Donbas. They didn't make territorial demands on Crimea. With Crimea, they were satisfied with a 25-year lease of their naval base. That was enough. Just leave us alone. Then came the coup. For 7 years after the coup, Russia did not claim that Donetsk and Lugansk were part of Russia. Russia didn't seize them. Russia didn't annex them. Russia didn't claim these territories. All that Russia said was that they should be given protection and autonomy based on a treaty that Ukraine had signed and that France and Germany were guarantors and that the United States had backed in the UN Security Council, called the Minsk II Agreement. This was another Western cheat, because we know that there was no intention on the Western side or on the coup-led Ukrainian side to actually honor the very treaty that they had themselves signed. But there was no Russian demand for territory.
Right.
And President Putin explained in this press conference that the demands for Zaporizhia and Kherson region arose because the general staff of the military said that that was essential to protect the land bridge to Crimea. Now, this also is negotiable, or at least you sit and you negotiate it and you see, and maybe negotiations don't work in the end. Maybe they do. But we run from the negotiating table out of fear. It's pathetic. I've never seen anything like it.